My grandson was crying on the other end of the line. I was 80 miles north of Raleigh, sitting on my sister's porch in a little town called Henderson, when my phone lit up. The sun was just starting to slip behind the pines, and I had a glass of sweet tea sweating in my hand. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something told me not to. Grandpa. His voice cracked the way it used to when he was 6 years old and scared of the dark. Grandpa, she's at the cabin. She's got a crowbar. I sat up straight so fast the rocking chair groaned underneath me. My sister Dolores looked over from her knitting, reading the change on my face before I even opened my mouth. Caleb, I said, calm as I could make it. Son, breathe. Tell me exactly what you're seeing. I followed her, Grandpa. She said she was going to the gym, but she drove out to Pine Hollow instead. I'm parked across the road right now. She's trying to pry open the padlock on the back shed. Grandpa, she knows. She knows about it. I closed my eyes. 5 years. 5 years. I had been preparing for this moment, and still hearing it out loud made my chest tighten like a fist. I had hoped I was wrong. I had hoped the woman my grandson married would prove me wrong. That the instinct sitting low in my gut since the first Thanksgiving I had met her was just an old man's suspicion. It wasn't. It had never been. Caleb, listen to me. You stay in your truck. You do not get out. Do you hear me? But I know what she's doing. I need you safe, and I need you to trust me for the next 20 minutes. Can you do that? He went quiet. I could hear his breathing, fast and shallow, and the soft tick of his engine cooling in the evening air. Yes, sir. Good boy. Grandpa's got this. I promised your grandmother a long time ago I'd look after you, and I meant it. Now start your engine, pull up the road half a mile, and wait. Don't come back to the cabin until I tell you. I hung up, and Dolores was already holding on my keys. She'd been married to my brother for 41 years before he passed, and she knew the look on a man's face when something he'd been bracing for had finally arrived. Go, Raymond, she said. I'll pray for that boy. I didn't drive back to Wake Forest that night. I didn't need to. The cabin at Pine Hollow wasn't just a fishing property. It was the one place on earth that held everything that mattered, and I had built every lock on it with a woman named Delilah in mind. Delilah Hartwell. Or, as the pastor introduced her the day she married my grandson, Delilah Jennings, my grandson's last name, my last name. Let me back up. Caleb is my daughter Ruth's only child. Ruth died of ovarian cancer when the boy was 9 years old, and his father, my former son-in-law, was not the kind of man you'd hand a child to. He had other plans that did not include a grieving little boy. So my wife Eleanor and I took Caleb in, and we raised him in our farmhouse outside of Raleigh. And we loved him the way you love a second chance that God hands you when you weren't expecting one. Eleanor passed 4 years ago, stroke in her sleep. She was 67. I still set 2 coffee cups out some mornings before I catch myself. So when I say Caleb was all I had, I mean it literally. He was all I had, and I was all he had, and everything I'd built in 42 years of running a residential electrical contracting business was going to be his. The farmhouse. The 2 rental properties in Durham. The investment accounts Eleanor and I had fed quietly for decades. The cabin. And the one thing in the cabin that mattered more than all of it put together. Caleb met Delilah at a charity 5K in Cary about 2 years ago. He was 28, working as a project manager for a commercial construction outfit. Finally feeling settled after a rough patch in his mid-20s. Delilah was 31, taught 2nd grade at a private school, drove a used Honda, wore sundresses and pearl earrings, and called me sir the first 6 times we met. I liked her. God help me, I liked her at first. She made Caleb laugh. He hadn't laughed like that since his grandmother died. She cooked Sunday dinner at my house twice before she ever asked for anything, and she brought a pecan pie the second time that she'd made from scratch. She complimented Eleanor's china without knowing it was Eleanor's. She cried a little when Caleb showed her the old family photos on the mantle. I watched all of it, and somewhere around the 4th or 5th visit, I started noticing the things underneath the things. The way her eyes tracked across the living room, not looking at us but counting. The way she asked Caleb so casually what his grandfather had done for a living and whether the business was still in the family. The way she lingered in the hallway outside my office one Sunday afternoon when she thought I was napping, her hand resting on the doorknob just a beat too long. And then there was the ring. Caleb brought her to the house one evening and told me privately in the kitchen that he wanted to propose. He had saved up for a year, he said. He'd picked out a ring at a jeweler in Raleigh. 1 carat, good clarity, about $7,000. She told him, in front of his friends at a dinner 3 weeks later, that the ring was cute, but that she'd always pictured something more like her cousin's, which she then described in detail. 3 stones, 2.5 carats, platinum band. Her cousin's husband was a cardiologist. Caleb returned the ring. He took out a loan. He bought her the one she wanted. $18,000, financed at 9%. I didn't say a word. A grown man has to learn some things for himself, and an old man who pushes too hard on a grandson's pride just loses the grandson. But that was the day I picked up the phone and called my attorney. The wedding was at a vineyard in Chapel Hill. 220 guests, half of whom my grandson had never met. The flowers alone came in at just under $22,000. Delilah's mother, a woman named Cheryl, who I met for the first time at the rehearsal dinner, spent most of the reception asking me about my portfolio. Her exact word, she asked if I had diversified holdings and whether I'd considered my succession strategy. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my first truck. I smiled and told her I was just a tired old electrician, and she patted my hand and said she'd always admired men who knew the value of a dollar. I went home that night, and I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, and I looked at the photograph of Eleanor on the mantel, and I said out loud, "Honey, we've got a problem." The prenuptial agreement was the first piece. I'd had my attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia who's been handling my affairs for 20 years, structure it carefully. Caleb didn't want to ask for one. He was embarrassed. He loved Delilah, and he believed she loved him, and he didn't want to insult her. I told him I wasn't asking. I told him that if he wanted my blessing and he wanted his inheritance to remain his inheritance in the event that something went sideways, the prenup was not optional. I told him that if Delilah truly loved him, she would sign it without a second thought because her love wasn't predicated on my bank accounts. He hated me for a week. Then he asked her, and she signed it with a smile at Patricia's office on a Tuesday afternoon. Barely read it. Just flipped to the signature pages and scrawled her name, the way you sign for a package. I watched her do it, and I thought, she thinks she has time. She thinks she'll work on him, wear him down, find a crack in the foundation, and eventually the piece of paper won't matter. She was half right. She did think that. She was wrong about the other half. The second piece was the trust. Patricia and I spent 9 months structuring it, an irrevocable trust. Fully funded, with Caleb as the sole beneficiary, but with a professional trustee, a bank's trust department, sitting between Caleb and the assets, the house, the rentals, the investment accounts, the cabin. Every meaningful thing I owned was moved into that trust over the course of 2 calendar years, carefully, with proper tax planning. Caleb knows about the trust in a general sense. He knows there is an estate plan, and he knows Patricia is the one to call when the time comes. What he doesn't know, and what Delilah definitely doesn't know, is the specific language inside it, specifically the language that says the trust assets cannot be used as marital property, cannot be borrowed against by a spouse, and cannot be accessed by Caleb in a single lump sum before age 50. He gets distributions, generous ones, but the principal stays put, protected from him and from anyone who might have designs on him. It is, in legal terms, a spendthrift trust with a bulletproof spousal exclusion. That's the second piece. The third piece is what was in the cabin. Pine Hollow is 40 acres off a gravel road in Granville County. Eleanor and I bought it in 1989 for $14,000. We built the cabin ourselves over 2 summers with Ruth helping mix mortar when she was 15. There's a pond, a dock my brother and I built, and behind the main cabin, a smaller outbuilding I always called the shed. It has reinforced walls, a steel door, and a lock system I installed myself. Inside that shed is a fireproof safe. Inside the safe is a leather-bound journal about the size of a hardcover novel, wrapped in brown paper the way Eleanor used to wrap Christmas presents. That journal is why Delilah drove to Pine Hollow with a crowbar in her trunk. I need to explain what she thought was in there, because it wasn't the truth. About 14 months ago, Caleb let it slip at a family dinner that I had something valuable out at the cabin. He'd had 2 beers, and he was being a little proud of his grandpa. And he said something like, "Grandpa keeps his real treasure out at Pine Hollow. The good stuff, not the stuff in the bank." I watched Delilah's face when he said it. I watched it the way you watch a hawk notice a rabbit. Over the next year, she asked about the cabin. A lot. She asked if we ever went out there, whether I kept anything irreplaceable there, whether the insurance covered the contents. She asked one evening when Caleb was in the kitchen whether I'd ever thought about having the valuables appraised. She framed it as concern. "I'm old," she said. "What if something happened? Wouldn't it be better if Caleb knew what was there?" I told her the shed was full of old tools and fishing gear. I looked her in the eye when I said it, and I saw her not believe me, and I saw her file that disbelief away for later. Then, 2 months ago, something shifted. Caleb came to me privately and said Delilah had been asking about the storage key. Said she'd offered to help organize the cabin as a surprise for my birthday. Said she'd been pressing him to find out the combination to the shed lock. That was my signal. That was the moment I knew the clock was running. I called Patricia. I called a man I know who installs security systems. And I called my sister in Henderson and told her I was coming to visit for a few days. And I made sure Caleb and Delilah both knew I'd be gone. I made sure it was mentioned at Sunday dinner. I made sure Delilah overheard me saying I'd be out of state and unreachable. I gave her the window she'd been waiting for, and she walked right into it. When Caleb called me from the side of that gravel road, I was not surprised. I was sad, but I was not surprised. I drove back that night. 4.5 hours, Henderson to Pine Hollow. I called Patricia from the road and told her to be ready. I called my security guy and confirmed the cameras had captured everything. I called Caleb 3 times just to keep his voice steady, just to remind him that his grandpa was coming. By the time I pulled up the gravel drive, the sun was long gone and my headlights were the only thing cutting through the pine trees. Caleb's truck was parked by the pond. Delilah's car was parked crooked in front of the shed. The steel door was scratched and dented where she'd tried the crowbar and given up. The padlock had held. She was sitting on the cabin porch when I walked up. She'd let herself in with the spare key. Caleb kept under the flower pot, helped herself to a glass of my bourbon, and was scrolling through her phone like she was waiting for a ride home from the airport. She looked up when she saw me. Her face did a remarkable thing. It cycled through surprise, then calculation, then a practiced softness, all in about 2 seconds. "Dad," she said. She'd started calling me Dad about 6 months into the marriage. "I'm so glad you're here. I can explain." I did not ask her to explain. I sat down in the rocking chair across from her. Caleb came up the porch steps behind me and stood beside my chair, and I could feel him shaking. "Delilah," I said, "I want you to listen carefully because I am only going to say this once, and then a decision is going to be made." She opened her mouth. I held up my hand. "I've been doing this a long time. Electrical work, I mean. 42 years. You know what the first thing you learn is? You learn that the thing that looks safe is usually the thing that'll kill you, and the thing that looks dangerous is usually fine once you understand it. You learn to respect what's underneath the surface. You learn that most problems in a house aren't in the room you're standing in. They're in the walls." She blinked. She didn't know where I was going. "Nobody ever does." "I've known about you," I said, "since the flowers cost $22,000. Her face went still. "I don't mean I suspected. I mean I knew. I knew when your mother asked me about my portfolio at the rehearsal dinner. I knew when you sent that ring back. I knew when you started asking about the cabin. I've known for a long time, Delilah, and everything you've been trying to get to has already been moved." She set the bourbon down. Her hand was steady. I'll give her that. She was a cool customer, right up until the end. "The shed," she said finally. "What's in the shed?" "My wife's journal," I said. "My Eleanor. Every day of our marriage for 41 years, she wrote 1 page. Just one. Something that happened. Something she was grateful for. Something she wanted our grandchildren to know. The last entry was 2 days before her stroke. It's the most valuable thing I own, and it is worth exactly nothing to anybody but me and the boy standing next to me." She stared at me. "That's what's in there," I said. "Paper, ink, a woman's handwriting. I wanted you to believe it was gold bars. I wanted you to believe it was cash, because I needed to know before my grandson gave you any more of his life what you'd be willing to do to get it. Dad, I wasn't. The cameras caught you, I said. 3 of them. Motion activated. Cellular uplink. My security guy has the footage. He saved it to 2 separate servers. 1 copy's already with my attorney. I let that sit for a long moment. Here is what is going to happen, Delilah. You are going to get in your car. You are going to drive back to the condo and Carrie. You are going to pack your things. Caleb is going to stay at my house tonight and tomorrow night, and as many nights as he needs. On Monday morning, my attorney Patricia will call your attorney, if you have one, or you will be getting one shortly. The prenuptial agreement is going to be enforced. Every dollar you brought into that marriage, you leave with. Every dollar of his, including the one you've been spending on the BMW lease and the yoga studio membership, stays with him. There will be no negotiation. You can't, I can. I already have. She looked at Caleb. I want to be fair here. I want to tell this truthfully. She looked at him and she tried one more time to pull on the thing that had worked for 2 years. Baby, she said, you know me. You know I love you. Tell him this is crazy. Caleb did not say a word for a long time. I watched him. I watched my grandson, the 9-year-old who used to cry into his grandmother's shoulder after his mother's funeral. The 20-year-old who'd called me at midnight when his first girlfriend broke his heart. The 28-year-old who'd stood beside me at his grandmother's grave 4 years ago. He was 30 now. He was a grown man. And he said quietly, Delilah, I followed you here. I watched you try to break a lock on my grandfather's property with a crowbar. You told me you were going to the gym. She started to cry. I think some of it was real. You lied to me, he said. For 2 years, you've been lying to me about something. And I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself Grandpa was just being overprotective. But I followed you tonight and I saw what you were doing, and I can't unsee it. He turned to me. His voice was steady. Grandpa, thank you for coming. That was it. That was the moment. She left an hour later, after I made her hand me the spare key and her key to my house and the key to the mailbox. She tried, twice more, to soften Caleb. He didn't look at her. The divorce was filed in 11 days. The prenup held, exactly as Patricia had written it. The BMW went back to the dealership. The condo, which was in Caleb's name, went back on the market. Her mother called me once, 3 weeks later. Cheryl. She called me Raymond instead of Dad, and she tried to negotiate. She said Delilah was devastated and that we could work something out. I told her I was just a tired old electrician and I had nothing to work out with her, and I hung up. That was 8 months ago. Caleb lives in the farmhouse with me now. He took over the small upstairs apartment Eleanor used to use as a sewing room. He's dating again, slowly, carefully, a woman named Hannah who works as a pediatric nurse at Duke. She's brought a casserole to the house twice, and she has not once asked me about my portfolio, and she pays for her own coffee when they go out. I'm not saying she's the one. I'm saying Caleb is learning to notice the things underneath the things. And that's all a grandfather can ask. Last Sunday, I took him out to Pine Hollow. I unlocked the shed. I opened the safe. I handed him the leather-bound journal wrapped in brown paper. He held it for a long time before he opened it. When he did, he read the first page, which was dated October 14th, 1982, and was about the day his mother, Ruth, was born. Eleanor had written it in her looping, careful hand. She described the weight of Ruth in her arms. She described the weight of Ruth in her arms. She described the way the October light came through the hospital window. She described how I had cried, which I had forgotten and which I denied, until Caleb read it back to me and I remembered. He read for 2 hours. I sat on the porch and watched the pond. When he came out, his eyes were wet, and he sat down next to me and he said, "Grandpa, this is worth more than the house." "I know it," I said. "She really thought it was gold." "She did. You let her think it." "I did." He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Thank you." And I thought about all the things I could say, about how his grandmother was the reason I built the cabin, and the reason I structured the trust, and the reason I watched Delilah's face the moment her mother said the word portfolio. About how love isn't a thing you weigh in a scale against an inheritance. About how the only fortune worth protecting is the one you can't spend. But I didn't say any of that. I just put my hand on the back of my grandson's neck, the way my father used to put his hand on mine. And I watched the sun go down over Pine Hollow Pond. She went after the shed. She thought the locks were the prize. She never understood that the locks were just a test, and that the real inheritance had been sitting in plain sight on the mantel, and a photograph of an old woman with kind eyes, who had written down every good day of her life so that the grandson she would never meet as a grown man could know exactly who he came from. That was the legacy. That was the only legacy that ever mattered. And in the end, the woman who tried hardest to steal it was the one who proved beyond any doubt that she could never have understood what it was.